Hi, this is Mr. Hutchings, and you're watching Mr. Hutchings History. Today's lecture is Unit 4.3, the Columbian Exchange, which supports the AP World History program. Our time period is 1450 to 1750. Our themes will be humans and the environment, economic systems, social interactions and organization, cultural developments and interactions, and finally, technology and innovation. The historical reasoning skill that we're going to use in this episode will be causation. We are crushed to the ground, we lie in ruins. There is nothing but grief and suffering in Mexico and Tlatelolco, where once we saw beauty and valor. So laments an anonymous Aztec poet writing in the aftermath of the Spanish conquest. Those words capture the human cost of the Columbian Exchange, the vast transfer of life, disease, and culture between the Eastern and Western Hemisphere after 1492. Why call this an exchange if so many suffered? Because exchange describes movement, not equality. Ideas, crops, and people crossed oceans, but their impacts were unequal, revealing the theme of humans and the environment and the skill of causation as disease and empire reshaped the planet. Before Columbus, the people of Afro-Eurasia and the Americas had been isolated for millennia. No horses in Mexico, no potatoes in Europe, no smallpox in the Andes. When the hemispheres met, the results were transformative and deadly. Why did disease matter more than weapons? It's because pathogens traveled faster than armies. Smallpox, measles, and influenza spread through the respiratory system, killing over half of the indigenous population within a century. This was the greatest demographic collapse in recorded history and a turning point in environmental and social history. Spanish conquistadors, Hernan Cortez in Mexico and Francisco Pizarro in Peru, carried not just steel and faith, but smallpox on their breath. Disease spread ahead of conquest, erasing communities before Europeans arrived. Insects, rats, and livestock from the old world of Afro-Eurasia brought new microbes. Native societies in the Americas, who had lived without epidemics for centuries, had no immunity. Some regions of the Americas lost as much as 90% of their people. What does this reveal about the relationship between disease and empire? It reveals that empires often expanded where disease cleared the way. The accidental weapon of pathogens transformed demography and labor systems. Europeans brought horses, pigs, cattle, sheep, and goats to the Americas. These animals were completely new to indigenous communities in North and South America. Their arrival reshaped food supplies, farming practices, the environment, and, most importantly, daily life. Horses were a transformation of mobility and power. Horses had the greatest long-term impact, especially on the Great Plains of North America. Before horses, Plains nations Indians hunted bison on foot. This required coordinated group movement, careful tracking, and long-distance endurance. After the arrival of horses in the 1600s, everything changed. There was faster movement and bigger territories for these Indians once they acquired horses. Horses made travel quicker and allowed families to move camps more easily. Communities could follow bison herds over wider areas, leading to greater independence for the tribes, easier relocation of the Indians themselves, and expanded trade networks which already existed between tribes. Mobility became a key strength. There was more efficient buffalo hunting because of the horse. Hunting from horseback made it possible to approach large herds safely and quickly. This produced more reliable food supplies for the Indians, surplus meat that could be dried or traded, animal hides for clothing, shelter, and trade with neighboring groups and Europeans. Surplus food and materials supported population growth and strengthened the native communities. The horse also brought social and political changes. As horses became valuable, they reshaped indigenous society. Wealth was measured in the size of a horse herd. Skilled riders gained respect as warriors or hunters. Families exchanged horses as gifts, strengthening alliances. Horse culture encouraged new leadership roles and greater social complexity. Horses also brought new conflicts and new cooperation. Horses changed relationships between the indigenous nations. Some groups used horses to defend territory or controlled trade routes. Others formed alliances built around shared hunting grounds. Increased competition sometimes led to warfare over access to bison and grazing lands. In short, the horse increased both opportunity and risk. While horses shaped society, other animals reshaped the land. Pigs multiplied quickly and often escaped into the wild. Pigs would destroy crops, spread into forests, and pigs carried diseases that could spread to local wildlife. Pigs changed ecosystems in ways indigenous farmers could not control. Cattle provided new sources of meat and hides, but cattle also required large grazing areas, and cattle required permanent or semi permanent fields. This clashed with indigenous farming systems that used smaller, sustainable plots of maize, beans, and squash. Sheep and goats ate vegetation to the root. They also caused soil erosion by eating vegetation to the root, and sheep and goats reduced the availability of native plants. Over decades, landscapes that had supported indigenous agriculture were transformed into grazing land for European style ranching. How can one animal redefine an entire society? Well, a single new animal can change everything because technology and nature work together. Horses were not just animals, they became tools of movement, hunting, trade, and political power. Horses reshaped how people lived, how they used land, and how people interacted with their neighbors. This links to the themes of technology and innovation, as well as social interactions and organization. While livestock and wheat crossed west, plants like maize, potatoes, tomatoes, beans, and cacao crossed east. For Europeans, Africans, and Asians, these crops were completely new. They spread quickly because they were easy to grow, filled with calories, and often survived in poor soil. As a result, these crops transformed diets, transformed farming, and transformed population patterns across the Eastern Hemisphere. New World crops offered advantages the Old World crops did not. New World crops had high calories. Potatoes and maize provided more energy per acre than wheat. The New World crops provided flexible growing conditions. Many of these crops could survive cold climates, dry regions, or thin soil. Also had the advantage of easy storage. Potatoes stored through the winter, maize flour kept for very long periods. The New World crops also had high nutritional value. Beans, tomatoes, and cacao added important vitamins and minerals to the Old World diet. For societies facing food shortages in the Old World or suffered unpredictable harvests, these New World crops were life saving. The potato, originally from the Andes, grew well in northern Europe's cold, wet climate. places where wheat struggled. For millions of poor families in Northern Europe, one small field of potatoes could feed a household for months. Children grew stronger because they had reliable calories, and winter hunger in these regions of Northern Europe decreased. As a result, Europe's population surged from the 1500s to the 1700s. More people meant more workers, bigger cities, and eventually more soldiers and sailors, fuel for European expansion. New world crops also reshaped African diets. Maize grew well in the hot, dry regions of Africa. Manioc, also called cassava, grew in sandy soil and resisted drought. Both maize and manioc, cassava, both provided dependable calories even in difficult African environments. These crops supported population growth in many regions of Africa. Tragically, this growth happened at the same time the Atlantic slave trade expanded. While millions were violently taken from Africa, maize and manioc helped sustain the communities which were left behind. New foods did more than fill stomachs. They changed economies. More calories led to more people. More people led to more labor, more trade, more competition. And more competition led to new political and economic pressures. This connects directly to the AP theme, economic systems. Food itself became a source of power, shaping who grew, who migrated, and who suffered. Why did New World crops have such an impact abroad? These crops were powerful because they were calorie dense, easy to grow, and adaptable to different climates. These new crops helped societies survive famines, grow their populations, and build stronger economies. In the theme of economic systems, food became a strategic resource that shaped global development. Sugar was the engine of empire. In Brazil and the Caribbean, the ideal climate and soil made sugarcane grow quickly and in huge quantities. Europeans built large plantations called engenhos, the Portuguese word for engines, because these estates operated like machines, always running, always demanding labor, and always producing profit. Sugar equaled wealth for Europe. Sugar became one of the most valuable goods in the world. It fueled new industries like baking, candy making, and rum. It became a symbol of wealth on European dining tables. European merchants, ship owners, and investors grew rich from sugar. By the 1600s and 1700s, sugar was so profitable that European empires competed fiercely for Caribbean islands. Controlling sugar meant controlling wealth. When Europeans first arrived in the Americas, they forced indigenous people into plantation labor. But diseases like smallpox killed millions of indigenous people. Warfare, displacement, and harsh working conditions further reduced local populations. European settlers created a system that demanded enormous labor, but then destroyed the very people they tried to exploit. As a result, they turned to Africa to fill the labor crisis. To keep sugar plantations operating, Europeans forcibly transported over 12 million Africans across the Atlantic. This journey is known as the Middle Passage, one of the most brutal experiences in world history. Where enslaved Africans were sent, Brazil, nearly 40% of the total slave population which was trafficked. The Caribbean islands received over 40% of the trafficked, trafficked Africans. North America received less than 6% of the enslaved trafficked Africans. Enslaved Africans did not experience this system equally. Most were sent to regions where sugar demanded constant, exhausting labor. Life and death on sugar plantations was quite a difficult experience. Sugar cultivation was extremely dangerous. Cutting cane under tropical sun was very difficult. Feeding boiling cauldrons for refining sugar was quite dangerous. Long working days with little rest for the slaves, and of course, frequent injuries from the machinery of the sugar plantation. Death rates were so high that plantation owners expected to replace about 10% of their enslaved workers every year. Enslaved people were treated as replaceable labor rather than human beings, an essential and tragic truth students must understand. Despite this, enslaved Africans resisted in countless ways. They preserved their African culture. They attempted to form families, often sabotaging equipment when they could, escaping, and leading revolts. Sugar was not just a crop, it was part of a global economic network. It was a triangle of commerce. Europe sold manufactured goods, guns, textiles, alcohol to African traders. African experienced mass kidnapping and forced export of millions of people. The Americas used enslaved labor to produce sugar, rum, and other commodities. Europe then profited from selling these goods in global markets. This triangle linked continents in a system where wealth flowed upward and suffering flowed downward. How did sugar link three continents in one system? Sugar tied Europe, Africa, and the Americas together through a cycle of profit and exploitation. Europe made money from selling manufactured goods. Africa was forced into the system through the capture and transport of enslaved people. And the Americas produced sugar using enslaved labor. This triangle shows patterns of causation under the AP themes of economic systems and social interactions, where economic profit depended upon human suffering. Enslaved Africans brought not only their labor, but culture. They introduced okra, rice, and culinary knowledge that shaped Southern American diets, like gumbo. They blended European and West African languages into Creole tongues, still spoken in the Caribbean and parts of the U.S. South. Their music and rhythms became the roots of blues, jazz, and gospel music. How did enslaved people preserve identity in a system designed to erase it? The enslaved people preserved their identity through cultural adaptation, recreating community through language, food, and music. This shows the theme of cultural developments and interactions, and the human resilience within bondage. European settlers cleared forests for crops, overgrazed land with cattle, and introduced rats and mosquitoes that carried disease. When Europeans arrived in the Americas, they brought old world farming habits, animals, and expectations for land use. These choices reshaped ecosystems from the Caribbean to South America, often in ways that were rapid, destructive, and permanent. Settlers cut down forests to grow export crops, especially sugar. Forest clearing removed shade, changed rainfall patterns, and destroyed habitats that indigenous communities depended on. One example is the disappearing Caribbean forests. On islands like Hispaniola, Jamaica, and Barbados, sugar plantations expanded so quickly that entire forests vanished within decades. Planters burned trees to create fields and used the wood to fuel sugar boilers. With forests gone, soil washed away during tropical rains, and rivers ran muddy and shallow, and native animals disappeared. By the 1700s, travelers wrote that some Caribbean islands were stripped bare, a direct consequence of plantation culture. European farming focused on single crops: wheat in the north, sugar in the Caribbean, and later coffee and tobacco. Planting the same crop repeatedly drained nutrients from the soil, forcing settlers to clear even more land. This led to soil depletion and was caused when farming exhausts the land. An example of this would be the sugar plantations in Brazil. Brazil's northeast became the world's center of sugar production. But sugarcane is a hungry plant. It depletes soil very quickly. Planters responded to this hungry plant of sugarcane by moving to fresh land instead of restoring old fields, cutting down more of Brazil's coastal Atlantic forest, and pushing indigenous communities further inland. Brazil's sugar wealth came with a heavy environmental price: lost forests, eroded topsoil, and permanently altered coastlines. Overgrazing and invasive species also changed the Americas. European livestock, cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats, transformed American ecosystems. Many of these animals multiplied rapidly and consumed native plants faster than they can grow back. An example of this is the sheep ranching in Peru. After the Spanish conquered the Andes, the Spanish introduced enormous sheep herds. Sheep eat vegetarian down to the root, which caused a loss of traditional Andean crops, soil erosion on mountain slopes, expansion of desert like areas, and the decline of native animals like the guacanos and vicuñas. Indigenous communities had managed Andean landscapes for thousands of years, but sheep disrupted these sustainable systems within a century. Alongside livestock, Europeans unintentionally introduced rats and mosquitoes. These pests spread diseases like malaria and yellow fever, especially in tropical areas. Meanwhile, growing colonial towns and plantations required water, far more water than the environment could supply. Wells dried up, rivers were polluted, and irrigation systems redirected water away from indigenous farmlands. Why does environmental impact matter in a discussion of trade? Environmental impact matters because trade changes how people use land. With sugar in Brazil, sheep in Peru, and deforestation in the Caribbean, the Columbian Exchange reshaped environments as much as it reshaped economies. Under the AP theme of humans and the environment, we see that global trade was also global environmental engineering, and its effects are still visible today. Let's focus on our historical thinking practice. Using causation, we can map this exchange as a chain reaction. The cause was the transoceanic contact after 1492. The effect, transfer of disease, crops, animals, and people. The short term effect, demographic collapse and economic realignment. The long term impact, cultural fusion and global interdependence. Did the Columbian Exchange create a single world or two unequal ones? Well, one answer could be both. It connected continents into a single system, but that system was built on inequality and enslavement, revealing the dual legacy of globalization. The Columbian Exchange was not a moment, but a transformation. It remade diets, populations, and ecosystems forever. From the potato fields of Ireland to the sugar mills of Brazil, from the horses of the plains of North America to the banjos of the Carolinas of the southern United States, the world became one living network of exchange. Was the world better connected or worse off because of this exchange? It was both, enriched and scarred. Connection brought progress and pain in equal measure. A reminder that every link in history carries a cost. I'm Mr. Hutchings, and you've been listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Until next time, stay curious. History matters.